get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Scott Markman of the MonogramGroup.com. And Scott has been doing this agency and business thing for, I'm not going to age you too much, Scott, but like decades and decades. So he's got a lot of experience to share and a lot of exciting stories. And before we dig into it, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Scott and Rod Holmes, we wouldn't have met without Rod Holmes, even though we probably at one point lived a mile from each other in Chicago. Rod Holmes runs Pilot Digital, and he actually talked about niching and growing your agency by using cash flow. And we're going to talk about niching too with Scott. I've had on Jason Swank, who Scott also knows. He built up his agency to over 8 figures and sold it. And then recently he's been buying up agencies. He also runs the agency group. I had Todd Taskey. He has a Second Bite podcast. He pairs, this is actually in Scott's world. They help a lot of private equity companies. So Todd pairs an agency with private equity and helps agencies sell to private equity. And he calls it Second Bite because sometimes those agencies, when the private equity sells the group the second time, they make more on the second bite than they do on the first. So his is really interesting, talking about agency valuations and M&A stuff. That was really cool. So check more of those out on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. And at Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the full accountability, and the execution. You know, Scott, we call ourselves the magic elves that work in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they could just focus on the relationship around their business. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I've found no better way over the past 15 years to profile the people and companies I most admire and share what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. Scott actually has a podcast. You can check it out on MonogramGroup.com, the podcast page. You should. And if you have questions, go to rise25.com and support at rise25.com. We're happy to answer them. We have many episodes on our podcast that actually answer the most frequently asked questions. So you can get those for free on the podcast. So without further ado, Scott Markman is the founder and president of Monogram Group. They're a global brand consultancy and creative branding agency based in Chicago with over 40 years of experience. He's led clients across diverse sectors, consumer products, B2B, nonprofits, but they are the leaders in rebranding for the private equity sector. They have served over 80 private equity clients, over 30 portfolio companies in the past almost 30 years. And you can check them out at MonogramGroup.com. Scott, thanks for joining me.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Jeremy. Thank you very much.
So just tell people a little bit more about Monogram Group and what you do.
Sure. So if you ask 100 people, what's a brand, you'll get 100 answers. And, you know, that's both an opportunity and a challenge. Because if people understood brands, how to develop brands, how to launch brands, how to curate brands, I wouldn't have a job. But there's a huge market for what we do. So a lot of times you get an answer, well, a brand's a logo, brand Starbucks, Nike, you know, Apple, blah, blah, blah. And it's not wrong. It's just, you know, 0.25% of what a brand is. It's the visual manifestation, like a little symbolic piece of it that, you know, you need to, you know, use proactively. But a brand is so much more than that. I tend to use an easy example, a metaphor to frame up how we describe brand and what we're hired to work on. So the example of Starbucks. We all buy Starbucks. We all stand in line. We all have one of 10,000 drinks that, you know, options we give to the barista. And then you pay your money and you walk down to the end of the aisle and you wait 2 minutes or a minute and a half, and you get your drink. Thank you very much. So everything around that company, their products, their store environment, the training of their baristas, their price point, their selection of sandwiches, everything that you can humanly think of is a part of that brand. But if you think about the internal and external audiences of that company and how they need to interact with them and deliver value to them, that's really where brand becomes robust and diverse and deep and interesting. So if you think about consumers, Jeremy, you and I go to Starbucks all the time. But guess what? They have consumers in places like China. And I've been there. I did business there for 9 years. And there's a lot that's very similar to walking into a Starbucks in Beijing or Shanghai, and some things that are wildly different. So consumers are all over the place. The second of which is their employees. We all know baristas, but there are guys in the warehouse, and there are people that drive trucks and all of that stuff. The third of which would be their suppliers. So coffee growers in Guatemala and people who supply the paper cups and all of it. The fourth, you might imagine, would be Wall Street, because they're a public company. And if you own shares or you're an analyst, you interact with a company in a certain way. And the fifth that I would tell you is social media, because to that company, the social media universe is incredibly important and a huge part of the brand. Now, if you think about these audiences, they all interact with a brand every single day, and they have wildly different self-interest, meaning, who are you? What are you going to do for me? And why should I care? And what are my options? Because we can all walk down the street and go to Dunkin', and a bunch of people do. Not my thing, but a lot of people do. So you have to be able to think about how to answer those questions from a brand perspective every day, all the time, into the definite future, and understand that the self-interest in those answers wildly differ from market or audience or segment to each other. Employees, consumers, suppliers, Wall Street, and the social media. They all only care about their own self-interest. What are you going to do for me? Because as consumers, with all due respect to the baristas, we don't care. We just want them to be there, deliver a smile, take my order, move on. We don't care about the health benefits. But you know what? That's why a lot of people work there. I'm not mean about it today, but historically was because they offered health benefits for part-time workers. So that self-interest is wildly diverse, but you only get one brand, right? You only get one brand. So the challenge and the complexity of brand work and brand strategy and advisory work and execution and creative and messaging is, how can you make all that work? Foundationally, the metaphor I use is you grab a flag and you plant it in the hill, and then you defend it. That's a brand. And this complexity is there all the time. And so the work that we do is mostly evolutionary. We don't blow stuff up that often. It happens occasionally, but the word rebranding typically means blow it up and build, Humpty Dumpty, build it back together again. We do some of that work. We do some brand creation work, corporate carve out. Somebody has an idea for a company, they need a brand. We're working on one of those gigs this summer. Most of the work that we do is evolutionary. And what I describe it as taking the Queen Mary and moving it 7 degrees to the left in the horizon. It doesn't seem very big, but steering a big ship in a different direction is hard. But once you get to the horizon, that 7 degrees becomes pretty important, and it's future looking. That's most of the work that our agency does. So again, there's a certain skill set to a brand evolution, repositioning, as opposed to blowing stuff up or invention. Again, we do it all, but 2/3 of our work is in the evolutionary stage. And so that's maybe, I hope, a pretty good overview for you and your listeners and watchers as to kind of the work we do.
I'm wondering the process. What does that look like? Because when you say this to me, it seems, really complicated. I don't say that in a negative way, but like there's so many different directions you can go. There's so much so many places you could start. So I like to learn, when someone comes to you, what does that process look like? Because like you said, and we're going to talk about niching, you have gone into different sectors in niched. And we talked about private equity, even if you look at consumer goods. So anyone who's listening to this, whatever company you have, like I remember when I had the founder of RX Bar on, originally they niched to CrossFit people, right? Anyone can eat the bar, obviously, but they niched. So, and this kind of goes into the broader scope of what does their brand look like? Who are they speaking to? So a company comes to you, what does that process look like? Where do you even start when you're talking about branding or rebranding?
I'm going to give you, Jeremy, a two-part answer. Our agency is extremely committed to and immersed in research and insights. Now, that's not unique. I mean, I will tell you that everything that we do, anybody in branding, there's no proprietary anything. So that's the backdrop here. Having said that, people have skill sets and focuses and priorities that differ. We are deeply grounded in research and insights. There's a reason. I had a longtime partner, Jackie Short, who was an extremely sophisticated research professional. She came out of corporate America. She ran research at Ameritech in the 90s. I mean, she was a dudess, right? And she is really one of two people who taught me the discipline and the priority and the process of research, both quant and qual. A vast majority of the work that we do involves qualitative research, executive interviews. I sort of do this kind of stuff like you're doing with me, but with internal constituents and external constituents for our clients. Now, it then further divides into two parts. In private equity, I've done probably 500 of these in the last 7 years. So with every interview, I have no notes. I just know what I'm trying to elicit, and I start a conversation, and I have a certain process, my talking points, like you're doing with me, this kind of stuff. And I approach those in a certain way. But for, let's say, a portfolio company or a big public company, the work that we do, you're probing into stuff that you're loosely familiar with, and you have a sense of what you're trying to gain out of it. But the questions you ask has got to be a lot more here. You have to get them approved by the client. Here's the 12 things I'm going to ask. We're going to do it over dozens of interviews, not 15. And it takes longer, and it's more of an investment. But I will say that we always say that the heavy lifting, the hard work is done there at the front end of these engagements. Figuring out who the hell are you? What are you going to do for anybody? Why should they care? And how do you tell that in a 2 minutes or less succinct story that hundreds of thousands of people across the enterprise are going to articulate through the written word and verbally and visually and all of that stuff? That's freaking hard. By the time that is approved, iterated, and approved, and we get into the creative, it's downhill skiing. It's fun. It's easier. It's a little more, it's a little bit more enjoyable because I love the creative process because I'm a designer by training. I'm a creative. I'm a creative who became a researcher and a strategist. And so I love the creative process. I love logo design. I love writing. I love video development. I love podcasts. I love the creative expression is really cool. But I also love the front end because I learned to be, kind of good at it. And to be the, kind of the dude in my agency to kind of own that piece of it. And, we're doing work now for two gigantic global brands. One's a public company, they make products, industrial products, and one is a private equity firm that's in infrastructure, and they're in 7 continents, and they manage a ton of money. It's so cool to do the work and to then sit back and think, well, okay, how do you piece all that together, and how do you present it, and how do you express strategy is so much fun. And it's hard. It's really hard, but it's like intellectually rewarding. And so I happen to really like it. Now I'm not a creative really in the agency anymore. Other people, the rest of my partner, the rest of the team, they're brilliant at what they do. And I come along for the ride, and I make sure that things are staying on brand and matching the strategy, but I'm not doing any anymore. And that's fine too.
What's Scott, you've done, and your company has done, who knows, tens of thousands of these type of interviews with executives and people from the company. Do you remember an example of an answer that stuck out that helped you get to kind of the core essence of a brand?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
I literally was talking about this with my partner about an hour ago. So we have a client, a private equity client in Little Rock, Arkansas. They're called Stevens Group. It's a family office, wildly successful, wildly interesting. But the history and the issues that we were asked to, kind of weigh in on and kind of solve for them are more deep and robust and nuanced and complex than the, typical private equity firm. This is a family. It's the multi-generational family. And so we've had to do a much deeper three-dimensional dive into that than most PE clients. And there was one interview I did, this is about 2 months ago, a gentleman that has known his family for decades and was close friends and business associates with, my client's father who started the whole enterprise. And he, in the answer to a question, to sort of sum up the culture, that kind of stuff, I'm directionally correct. He said, I would play poker with these folks over the telephone. He said more in 7 words than the next 60 interviews put together. Because you think about the implication of what he said, let alone the uniqueness of it. And he didn't think twice about it. I'm sure he's given that answer 100 times to describe the relationship with his family. I trust them so much that I would play poker with them over the telephone. I mean, if I'm in search of great metaphors and great visuals and great symbolism, I couldn't think of a better answer. Like I almost could have been done with the process. I know where to go with this. It was brilliant. He was not trying to be clever or cute. It was just a natural answer. And again, I think he's probably said 100 times. It was awesome.
I love that. So now this, like you said, it's downhill skiing once you do all this research. To me, it doesn't, I mean, you've done this is your expertise. To me, it doesn't seem like downhill skiing. It seems like there's a lot of work to be done. How does that research translate into now what you do for people and visually, right, with their logo and their brand?
So we live in a world of ideas, and creative, meaning visual expression, comes from foundational ideas, and foundational ideas come from positioning and strategy and insights. So there's A leads to B leads to C to all of this. And the challenge, the hard part of this is the nuance. When you think about all the factors that you control, the logo, colors, fonts, style of language, is it business and crisp or is it conversational and warm? All these nuances not only have to tie from the expression back to the strategy and insights, but they have to tie to each other, meaning the colors need to relate to the fonts, need to relate to the language, need to relate to the photography and the video. And when you go to a website, you design the user experience. It all has to tie together. It all has to go back to that flag that we talked about. You planted in a hill and defend. And there's clearly an art to that. In quotes, or literal, figurative art to that. There's a nuance to it. There's a deftness to that only comes from experience. Now, the great thing about our shop is that we only have senior creatives. Everybody who touches the work is at least 20 years, up to 40 years of experience in what they do. And so, no disrespect to young, brilliant creatives, there's no shortcuts. And to have people who've been around 100 blocks 1,000 times working together and have worked together for a long time, it's more gratifying. It's more nuanced, meaning the work that you can achieve is just more complex and nuanced, and you're just operating on a different plane. It's like, Tom Brady could do what Tom Brady did because he had done it 10,000 times in addition to being brilliant. But, Tom Brady, 10 years in his career, approached it differently than he was 1 year in his career with the same talent set. So there's just some of that going on in our shop. It's a cohesive team. We're all, singing from the same hymn book, and we know what the hell we're doing. And so we also know how to present and how to persuade clients to buy the work we want them to buy. There's an expression in our shop, and again, we didn't make this up. The best work never sees the light of day without a client who will buy it. And so there's an art to the presenting and to the persuading. We don't ever walk in with one answer to anything and say, Here's your answer ever. With logos, we're going to show 6. And we rank order them, and we don't tip our hand, but once we present to the client, we get the reaction, then we'll say, okay, here's what we would do. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes it's a compromise. With a term we use is Frankensteining, right? A little bit of this, a little bit, rack it together. Okay, that's to be expected, and you even have to manage the Frankensteining to arrive at something that they feel good about and you feel good about. And it was a compromise. That's, the art of compromise is a big part of the journey.
I want to, since this is a very visual conversation, I want to share a couple things from your website real quick. So I'm going to pull up, if you are listening to the audio, you'll be able to watch this, the video piece as well. What we're looking at here is we're on MonogramGroup.com. I've already pulled up, if you go to their work page, and since I know you specialize in private equity, I pulled up the private equity piece. I mean, there's other categories here, mid-market and national and global and others, there's a number of things here, but I have the private equity just for this conversation. We're looking at, and I pulled up PSP partners. So I'd love to talk through a few examples so people can kind of visualize. So right here, we're on the page PSP partners, and we're looking at this. Obviously, someone's like, oh yeah, you just put PSP partners here and a couple there was a lot of work that went into this. What did it look like before versus after? And what was the feeling before versus after?
It's a great question, and I'll try and give, in a concentrated way, sort of a multi-part answer. First of all, for those who don't know, PSP Partners is the family office of Penny Pritzker, who is famous and respected and, plays a leadership role in politics and business, both in Chicago and our country. She's world renowned and world respected, and all that comes with that. And so the complexity of what we have been asked to do, again, which is to build the brand of her office, and obviously by extension her. First of all, it's been an incredible honor. We've worked with them for about 4 or 5 years, and this went live, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. But Penny has built such a spectacularly accomplished and successful team, and works hard to strike a balance between, look, at the end of the day, this is her office, but making sure that she puts her team and the leadership team in the appropriate, I'll call it, level of kind of public expression and influence and all of these things, and the culture is so important to them that, again, this is almost like a mission-driven exercise, much more so than 90% of our private equity clients. It's it's a bigger picture, more robust, almost more personal dimensions to the exercise. Now, there are certain things that we didn't touch. I mean, the logo with those rectangles is not our work. We inherited that, and there's a good reason for it. Penny's original investment platform was real estate, and coming out of her family, founded Hyatt Hotels. And so, she just wanted to stay with that. And so we a little bit built around it. Now, what you look at here, what you're showing on the screen, Jeremy, is our work, which is brand architecture, which is managing levels and pieces that have to act on their own, but come together into some cohesive whole, is brand architecture. And so the nomenclature, PSP Partners, meaning they used to be called it was a little bit different. That's our work. And then the way in which the divisions, capital growth, risk, Pritzker Realty Group, asset management, are kind of staged and solidified visually to have a version of a collection of logos that are used in certain situations by dozens and dozens and dozens of people was our influence, and our actual work. And so it's a mix. This again, it's very bespoke. It's a mixture of what we inherited, what was off limits, and what we were asked to make better and to organize and solidify for easy expression and usage across their footprint.
So what was it like before?
Now,
They just had, was it just PSP partners, or what did it look like before?
um, no, the umbrella name was, I think, was PSP Capital Partners, but you see, Capital was a division, and so there was confusion. And so again, these are not gigantic moves, but they're important moves, if that makes sense. And a lot of it was around clarity and consistency. Um, I will tell any client of any stripe and any business circumstance that the mission of brand work is focus and clarity and consistency. And if you can master, or we together can master that, any brand, I don't care if they're a $4 billion company on down to a startup, is 90% ahead of the game. It's like field the ball short and throw it to first. And, when we talk about message, when we talk about design rules and nomenclature rules, just agree to it, have everybody execute along the same lines, and just rinse and repeat all the time. You're so far into the game because most businesses don't do this.
So PSP partners, and then I pulled up prospect partners.
Okay.
Talk about this one.
Sure. Very different situation. So also based in downtown Chicago, these two firms are 2 blocks from each other. 4 blocks. So Prospect Partners, there were 2 gentlemen that started this firm, very successful investors, and they had brought in a second generation of leaders. And when we were brought in there, they were transitioning. The 2 gentlemen who started it were a little bit kind of phasing out. They were kind of retiring. And the 3 guys who were in their early 40s, who had been brought in to take over the firm, were kind of in that process. There's 2 of the 3 right there, Eric and Brett. But they had never, ever, 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 ever invested in brand and marketing because the 2 founders just A, didn't believe in it, and B, were successful in spite of it. And so who was to tell them otherwise? Well, they had some stumbles about 5 years ago, not major, but enough that when this transition of generations was happening, these 3 partners here, our longtime clients, sort of said, we're going to do things differently. We believe in different things, and we need to kind of, I'll call it, take back our reputation and our message out there. And so the mandate here was to blow stuff up and to really take a baseball bat to things. So literally every shred of what you're showing on the screen right now, this has gone through like 2 cycles, is us. Every word, every idea, that design, that logo was, if I showed you the before and the after, you would laugh. They went from like the Philistines to the Olympics with nothing in between. And frankly, it's one of the cases I'm most proud of because the impact was so dramatic and so immediate. And, they're doing great things with this firm now. That it's a wonderful relationship, and, they've been a long-time client.
Scott, why do people end up coming to you? In this case, because obviously most people aren't coming to you being like, listen, I don't believe in it. We've done fine without it. Those people aren't coming to you, right? But there's something that happens in their trajectory of their company that makes them change their course or their thoughts. In this case, it was a generation coming in. What are usually the reasons, I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons of why people come to you and go, think now, this is important now?
Sure. So one thing to note for you and your listeners is that we do not convince any prospect to address their brand ever. Because if we did, I would get thrown out of the boardroom. Every prospect, this is maybe
it's like someone telling someone their baby's ugly, sort of thing.
Thank you. Yes, that would be a wonderful metaphor. Prospects self-select in. At the leadership level, they have identified that there's a trigger. Something's broken, something has changed, a merger, something is being started up, and they just flat out need something, right? Leadership has self-identified that they have a need for the expertise that we represent. Now, this is interesting. A lot of our brethren skew more towards the creative side. Hey, look at our stuff. We just do great creative and you should talk to us. We show that stuff, but we don't really flash it around. If somebody feels that way, terrific. But the reason people self-select into us is because of this front end, the research, the strategy, the positioning, the message. Who the hell are we? Which is almost an elemental need that most business people from this big to this big understand. And if they can't get their, what together about that, they're going to struggle. And so a lot of times it triggers a website. It's out of date. It sucked. People have left. I mean, there's some almost tangible trigger, but oftentimes it's just, we haven't touched this for like 6 years and it's time to blah, blah, blah. We have a huge client. I mentioned this global infrastructure client, 40 billion under asset. The offices in like 7 continents, or 7 countries in like 5 continents. And they're 10 years old, and they have, they're like a 6'9", teenager that's playing basketball. And they looked around, and management sort of said, look, it's time. There are lots of infrastructure improvements and changes we're doing, big picture in this firm for the next 10 years, and this needs to be a part of it. Because right now their website is one page, no information, and it's almost like a landing page, and that's it. So we were hired to kind of build all this out, and again, to take them from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, because all of a sudden it became a really important thing, and rightfully so. So again, management, founders, on down to second level leaders are going to find somebody, and they found us because we have all this experience, and we had to compete, and we won the business. And so it's like building a 60-story building.
I want to talk about niche for a second and the evolution of your company, what niches you've gone through. I know you're right. I mean, you've been focused on private equity, and I know you've been there, you've gone away from it and come back to it. So I want to hear about why. Because when I think of what you do, I think for some reason, I don't know why in my mind, I think consumer products, consumer packaged goods. Like they're always, what I see there is like, how do I experience this company and brand? So talk about the niches that you've served, a little bit of the evolution, and then, maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages of niching.
Sure. So this is a conundrum and a challenge for anybody who owns any agency of any stripe. And we even see this on the private equity side. People want to cast a wide net. I want to bring all the opportunities in. Well, that works, and then sort of doesn't, because especially as the business world has evolved and brand and expertise and B2B versus B2C, the reality is we are well served to create inflows of opportunity, to win gigs, and candidly the fees we get, if you are selling a deep expertise. In private equity, we probably win 75% of our proposals, and the almost only reason we lose is price. Meaning somebody decided we're too much for the blood. They can find somebody who's like, a B minus, but for half the price, and they're local, and okay, great. We understand. So in private equity and the portfolio company work, where I win less, but again, we have a built-in advantage. The calculus, the algebra of leads and proposal writing and closing deals and doing the work, all of it is just a certain way. When we get into the general corporate world, we're competing against gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of firms. I mean, I think the number is there are like 5,000 firms in America that claim some branding expertise. And in the mid-tier, meaning below the global bad boys, right? We're in that mid-tier, we're the run to that tier, but we're firmly established. We compete with hundreds and hundreds of excellent firms, and it's more of a kettle call, and our win rate's probably 25% or 20%. So we like the balance because of, I'll call it intellectual curiosity, and just, we love taking on things we haven't done before, and intellectually and creatively you kind of need that. But what pays the bills and is the growth engine of the agency is private equity and portfolio companies for the reason you described, Jeremy, which is people are seeking deep, proven expertise. That's a business issue. And so it's an easier game for us to play. And I'm happy to, ride that wave to growth for a long period of time because, I'm trying to grow the agency and I'm probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years from selling it. And I love what I do, but I'd like to get, candidly, 5 years from now, get paid more to sell the agency than I have right now. That's the way to do it.
So what made you get away from it and come back to it?
Yeah, I'll be transparent about this. We had in 2015, early 2016, we were doing fine, but we hit the perfect storm in a bad way. After a period of about a year of doing pretty well, there was a period of 6 months where I went like over 20 in proposals. And there was no logic to it. There was nothing to be learned. It was like, we'll do this differently and this will change. It was just God decided that we were going to, be at the Sahara Desert for 6 months. And it was getting pretty desperate. And I thought, with my partner, like, what are we going to do? Well, the answer was to lean as heavily as we could and back into private equity. We had about 2 or 3 clients at the time, but it was on that sort of end of that 3-year cycle where we just sort of said, not for us. We just a little bit sick of it. And we said, out of sheer necessities and mother invention kind of stuff, we said we're going to lean back in and put our chips in the red square 20 at the roulette table, and it worked. Now we did some things to kind of expand what we could offer them at the same time, and that worked as well. So it sort of addressed the crisis, and then we just sort of said, I'd rather not sweat. Let's just lean into where we're strong, what we know, and where there's a market, and we've never stopped since. So it's been that's 6 years now, and again, it's worked. We've just made the Inc. 5000. We tripled revenue in 3 fiscal years, and we're on a big run rate. And so, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think. If we have an expertise and there's a market, a not limitless, but a huge market for our expertise, and then you layer onto it the portfolio companies, it could be 30,000 of them that all need what we have for certain set of reasons, then you kind of go, okay, I can ride this for a long time. And, and I can enjoy it, be good at it. There's just, there's such gratification about being an expert in something and enjoying the work you do and who you do it with and for. That's its own reward. And I call it the boredom factor, or the rinse or repeat factor. Just not gonna worry about it.
I feel like, Scott, it's a great lesson for all of us. And I hear it time and time again, even on the podcast, which is when times are tough, we go back to the fundamentals. We go back to the things that always are tried and true work. And sometimes I'll include myself in this bucket. There's new shiny things that attract me or people and companies, and it sets us off the course of what maybe we should be doing sometimes. And so I love that lesson because it's like, you really just went back to the fundamentals of what made you successful. And you're like, boom, now we're back on track. Right. And that's, I guess, one of the disadvantages of niching, because you get bored, people get bored. Right. So what were you going to say?
Look, it's a personality, commonality among anybody who's comes out of the agency world, which is we bore easily. And we're always looking for the bright, shiny objects or the things, the dragons to slay, to, challenge yourself and to prove your worth and all that good stuff. And that doesn't go away. Again, we work with a lot of, about half our clients right now have products and services, or I'll call it internal politics or whatever, that I just, haven't really encountered before. And so we have enough of the, it's scratching going on that there's a wonderful balance, but we know darn well which side of the bread is buttered. And I'm not running away from that. I mean, and again, it's pretty cool to be, kind of the dude in America on something. And, again, these are the wealthiest, smartest, most driven people on the planet. And like, I'm part of the boys club. and girls club, but really boys club. And it's kind of cool. I'm not a name dropper by personality, but I can walk into any boardroom in private equity in America and start dropping names, and in 30 seconds, I'm part of the boys club. And a piece of that, by the way, which everyone talked about, was our foundational client in private equity. It's a firm that everybody in private equity in America knows in 1 second. That's called Antares Capital. We were there at the very beginning when these 12 guys set up shop, and we built their brand from scratch. And today they're the franchise in the credit side of middle market deals. And they probably have 400 employees. They're owned by the Canadian government. 8 years ago, I think the division was spun off by GE Capital for $12 billion. So forget the name dropping. I can walk into any private equity shop in America and say, yeah, I created the Antares Capital brand. Instant credibility. Who doesn't love that? I mean, that's just, from a career perspective and who are you, a game do you play perspective, it's the best. And I'm still in touch with a bunch of guys from the Terrace. They've been kind of lifelong business friends, and so it's just that, like, who's going to walk away from that, right? It's great.
Scott, I have one last question. I know we only have a few more minutes. I really appreciate you sharing your journey, your expertise. Everyone should check out MonogramGroup.com to learn more. My last question is kind of along that line of mentors in the business and what you learn from some of these mentors.
It's a great question, and I have an immediate answer. I formed, in the last 9 months, a board of advisors with 3 folks. One of whom was my first client in Terrace Capital, Dave Swanson, who has been again a colleague but a lifelong 25-year friend. Another colleague, Dan Bauer, who was a client for 5 years and then became a very close friend and a colleague. He's now part of our team, and Dan works on 8 of our gigs a year and doing the research and strategy stuff. He and I divide and conquer that. And then my mentor, Bob Ritter, from Baltimore, where I'm from, who I worked for 5 years, again, been a dear friend ever since. And I formed this group to provide structured, feedback and counsel and telling me some tough news, things I, maybe don't want to hear and should be doing, and so on and so forth. But they all bring something different to the table from a personal, professional, career, industry perspective. And going forward until, I cash out, they're going to be a hugely valuable, critical piece of things to me. And again, it's pulling together some guys I dearly love and whose counsel and their perspectives I trust and again, they each bring something different to the table. That's pretty cool.
Everyone check out MonogramGroup.com or episodes of the podcast. Scott, thanks everyone. Thanks, Scott.
Jeremy, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And it was a great time.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.